Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
Welcome back to the Federal Drive with Terry Gerton on Federal News Network. As the various Senate committees release their proposals for the reconciliation bill, the Senate parliamentarian is ruling out many of the more controversial elements. Here with more insight as to what this might portend for the megabill's fate and other congressional activity is Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government, Lauren Duggan. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So palace intrigue continues around the megabill. What's the latest you're hearing on the Hill?
Well, this has been the week the senators were thinking they might get to vote on the bill. They've been releasing text from Senate committees, and the parliamentarian has begun her review of those sections to see if they comply with all the rules. So we'll be seeing what they can cobble together to be the version of the bill that goes to the floor, and then see what they do about the whip counting to see if it can get over the line. But that's kind of where we are this week with July 4th, their self-imposed deadline, not too far away and not too many working days left before that.
Some of the proposals that came up from committee that the parliamentarian has disposed of were moves, I would say, to interpret and implement DOJ's proposals. Like one was zeroing out CFPB. Do you think that's an indication of how some of those other proposals are going to fare?
It could be. There's some complex rules here about how wide-ranging some of the effects can be or some of the details there, and the parliamentarian is going line by line through all these provisions with the committee. So I assume, starting with that list from Friday, that we'll see more that's on the potential chopping block. Whether they pull it out before they get to the floor or do it on the floor is something we'll be watching to see. But yeah, those provisions are at risk because of these rules that the Senate set for itself, and because John Thune, the majority leader, has said he's going to uphold what the parliamentarian said. He didn't want to break the rules so that when they're in the minority again, they still have the same flexibility to knock things out of this bill, because the whole point of using this is it only needs a simple majority, not the 60 votes you need for most things. So that's kind of the narrow path that they have to tread on this piece of legislation.
What are the implications of all of these proposals and then disposals for conferencing of this bill? Is Thune trying to get it to the point where they don't have to have a conference, or is a conference looking like it's going to be inevitable?
We've heard different things there. I think he told reporters that he'd like to avoid a conference, and that's understandable because conference takes time. That means you have to form the conference, which takes steps in both chambers, and then actually meet, produce the report, and get it through. I think the ideal scenario here for Republicans would be if the Senate passes something the House can take up and pass, then they do that. But the House also has to digest and agree to whatever the Senate did. And one of the biggest gaps has been SALT, the $40,000 in the House versus the $10,000 in the at least initial Senate proposal. That's how much you can deduct from your state and local taxes. That could be a sticking point. And, they have time to resolve that in the Senate bill, maybe take care of that. But you can see where the choke points are between here and that sort of process playing out.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to watch. So obviously that's the biggest news, but we talk about rescissions too. The Trump administration sent up a rescission bill, but Russ Vought has also been talking about pocket rescissions, which apparently some Republicans think might be a step too far. Tell us about what you're hearing there.
Yeah, so we'll have a hearing this week in the Senate Appropriations Committee on that rescissions request, which the House has already passed and sent over. The Senate may make its mark on that bill. I think they're using this hearing as the first step there, asking him questions about it, asking him questions undoubtedly about all the things the administration has done to withhold funding that was put into place. The GAO has had to weigh in here and others, but this is the senators' chance to weigh in, see do they want to oppose or make changes to the PEPFAR language or changes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting language that was in the bill, because those are some of the provisions that have flared up. But they were looking for a debate maybe after July 4th on the floor, but this is a step where they're going to use their convening power to take a look at the bill and hear from the person who's kind of the brainchild of a lot of, or the progenitor of a lot of these cuts, Russ Vought, who leads OMB.
Right. It'll be really interesting to see then if the pocket rescissions come up in that hearing. He's been pretty transparent, speaking about it even on TV. So
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, on the House side, the DOGE subcommittee, as it's called, which is led by Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Georgia Republican, they're also doing a hearing about DOGE cuts and how to lock those in. So I think that'll be a discussion that comes up there. And as they write these fiscal 2026 appropriations bills, of trying to consider what DOGE has done or proposed doing in those bills as well.
I'm speaking with Lauren Duggan, the Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Well, speaking of appropriations bills and maybe any other bill that might ever make it through, one of the ones that typically does is the National Defense Authorization Bill. And there's some competing legislation going on around that. Tell us what you're hearing about NDAA.
Well, NDAA is one of these things that's been caught in late action on the fiscal 2025 bills and then late requests being delivered. The NDAA is annual legislation. They're always going to get to that at some point. The Secretary Hegseth and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff are up on the Hill the last couple of weeks talking about their proposal. So we'll probably start to see pen on paper here, I would assume, pretty soon. But one of the things I think that they'll be looking at is some acquisition reform efforts. There's a House proposal from the leaders of the House Armed Services Committee, and then a Senate proposal from Senate Armed Services. A little differences here or there, but this is often one of the things that they do every few years, and NDAA, as it's known, is try to take care of some of these acquisition questions. So we'll be watching that pretty closely as it begins to move.
Well, we're hearing that this may be the week that the defense budget actually comes to the Hill. So that's kind of important as a baseline for moving forward on the NDAA for next year.
Absolutely. And for the Defense Appropriations Bill, which has already been under development, but some of the procurement questions and how many weapon systems, all that sort of thing, they do need more documents from the administration, and that should help kickstart that process.
Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed on that. President Trump has said he's supporting a crypto bill that's originating in the House. What are you hearing about crypto?
Well, we had the big vote last week in the Senate on the Genius Act, as it's known there, and that is more about stable coins and regulating those. But in the House, there was a bill that came out of the Financial Services and Agriculture Committee that would say what the SEC and the CFTC, those two agencies, would do more broadly around digital assets. So you're beginning to see several components of a possible bill coming out here, or possible package, at least, of regulating crypto and stable coins, and also the meme coins, which have come up into the debate. So I think that we're seeing more movement on that. I do feel that it's becoming more of a priority and happening perhaps behind the scenes while the megabill is moving, but maybe in the future will become more to the fore as they try to get that piece of legislation over the line.
What are the key points in there?
Well, a lot of it is who regulates what and how does it work, right? Like, so that's the Clarity Act is the one I mentioned out of the House committees. That's more about how do these two agencies regulate digital assets. And what you hear from members on both sides is sort of a Wild West. So they're trying to rein that in a little bit and give some more kind of shape to what the regulation will look like, who gets to do what, and what people have to do to participate in that. So it's sometimes very complex legislation. The definitions matter a lot and what qualifies for different things. So the devil's going to be in the details on some of those bills. But we've seen a lot of action and perhaps even more interest in it, given the Trump administration's own interest in the subject and their donors and backers as well.
Right. Well, for an administration that's not too keen on regulation, having predictable regulation, especially in crypto and in banking, is so important for the markets.
Absolutely. And they'll be pushing for that more, I would say, in coming weeks.
Well, I got one more thing I want to ask you about. GAO has come out with another finding that the Trump administration has violated the Impoundment Act. So they're 2 for 2 right now. What are you hearing? Any discussion about that up on the Hill?
I mean, and this might be another thing that comes up in these hearings we've talked about. Lawmakers have traditionally wanted to guard the power of the purse and avoid these things. There have been lawsuits about this and agencies have weighed in. So this is part of the ongoing battle here that I think is not close to being resolved, but certainly a lot of data points are being calculated on that one.
Well, much to watch in the coming weeks. I've been speaking with Lauren Duggan, Deputy News Director at Bloomberg Government. Lauren, thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
We'll post this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Hear the Federal Drive on your schedule. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.